Working Cows Podcast, episode 249.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Bart, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you, Clay. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you for opening your home to me and giving me an opportunity to come out and chat a little bit about diversity.
Yeah, diversity. It's a big deal. I always say that diversity is as important to our future as breathing is to our present. So,
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's we need air to breathe right now, and it's important to exist. And a lot of times we get in monocultures and we don't worry about the diversity that's happening, and that's what actually gives us a future is the diversity.
Yeah, very. I appreciate that. I'm excited for this talk. You and I got into a discussion after a meeting just last week. Earlier this week,
yeah. Seems like a while ago already.
Yeah. But then, and it's one of my, I don't know, it's kind of like every episode I could say is one of my favorite topics, but the ecology side of this way of thinking is one of the things that excites me the most. That there's so much going on out there that is or maybe should be beyond our control. And I think the more we're willing to give up that control, probably the better those relationships get.
I think so too. It's like, we think of it as chaos, and I've heard it said that nature loves chaos, but really there's the more you study it, the more there is an order to it that God put in place right from the beginning and how everything works together. Here a few years ago, and because of the diversity on our place, the grazing school committee actually asked me to give a talk on diversity, and I didn't want that talk at all, but the more I prepared for it and looked into it, and the bigger role it is, it's just really become important to me.
Right. And that's the South Dakota Grassland Coalition's grazing school that they are still putting on 2 every year, right?
Actually 3 this year. There's
really?
one. We just had one a couple weeks ago, and then there'll be an East River grazing school in here in a week and a half, and then when this comes out, I guess a week.
Uh-huh.
And then there'll be one in September in Chamberlain, which is one we always have.
What's the East River one? Where's that at?
It's going to be a new one. It's going to be over in Watertown. We're kind of trying it over there for different purposes. There's the same reason we started the West River Grazing School.
Right.
There's and I've been there, so that I can speak from this point of view that we always have a mindset that works over there. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go to Muhammad instead of Muhammad to the mountain. So,
Yeah. No, I like that. It is, South Dakota's 2 different states.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
And so, it's easy for somebody in Wall to say, well, that works in Chamberlain, even though there's 150 miles between the 2 of them. And then it's probably easy for somebody to say, well, it's even maybe somebody would say in Watertown, it's too wet here, or that won't work here because of X, Y, and Z. And so,
yep. Well, that's what started me on this path was, at the time there was only 2 grazing schools I could go to, one in Missouri and one at Chamberlain. And it rains in both them places, so why would I go? They can't teach me nothing. So, ignorance is bliss,
Yeah. Was there a grassland coalition in Missouri putting one on?
No, it was, excuse me, at the time it was Jim Garish was putting one on down there. So, yeah.
He was still living in Missouri?
Yeah.
That was a few years ago.
It was a few years ago. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said that they asked you to do the great diversity talk at the grazing school because of the diversity on your place. What was what has facilitated the presence of that diversity here? Has it been the changes you've made, or has it been something that this place was kind of intact and well managed? What would you say?
It was the changes we made, because it was, if you graze the same every year, every time, graze at the same intensity, density, location, timing, nothing's going to change. I mean, that's why hayfields stay the same, because they're hayed the same week every year, roughly, and, at the same level. And as we changed our intensity on our grazing and our timing, there's different times where warm seasons then get to express themselves, or there's enough rest and recovery that sub-shrubs or shrubs start to get to grow. And we kind of come in and, of hitting that intensity and going ahead and not being afraid to take it off. And like you just had Jim on and talking about that level of utilization. And we've kind of been modeling that here, and then giving it lots of recovery that sometimes is 14 months up to 18 months, depending on what the weather and what the pasture needs for recovery. And I know I was up to Gabe Brown's when the grass-fed exchange was there, and he was doing the cover crop thing. And man, it was, at that time I was really trying to get so I could graze every pasture any time of the year, and I wanted a cow that would do it. So that was my focus, them two things. And so I was talking to him about cover crops, and he asked me if I had any farm ground, and I said no. And he said, then why would you plant cover crops? He goes, go talk to Kenny. And Kenny Miller just passed away this last year, but I got to visit with him, and he was asking me about winter fat, and I didn't have any. I couldn't find any. NRCS guys tried to come help me find it, couldn't find it. But we just kept managing. We always say manage for what you want, utilizing what you have. And we just kept on that plan and that goal in mind. And it took us about 6 years. And then all of a sudden winter fat showed up, which has totally changed our operation, because now it's a sub shrub that is 20% protein in the middle of the winter. Well, now it's growing out there, and cattle love it, and that's why you can't find it, because in season-long grazing, it gets grazed out, and then every time it peeks its head up, it gets nipped, and deer and antelope love it. Everything needs it, so.
That's kind of one of the things that I think that we, again, back to that idea of trying to control everything, rather than taking our hands off and saying, let's introduce rest, let's introduce varied season of use and see what happens. And that can be kind of scary, because it's not a monoculture anymore. There's new species there. Some people might call some of those species weeds, and we can get kind of worried, well, what are the neighbors going to think?
Oh, yeah. And weeds are forbs. That's in my language.
Right.
They're forbs.
Well, and I think like forbs, I've heard, I think somebody say forbs play a role in pest control. Like when they eat those things, their body chemistry changes so that those pests are not attracted to them anymore.
Yeah, some of them, and they all play a role, They're, and I'll say nature, but God's design is that ground is taking care of itself and covered. And so if things ain't right for the species we want to grow there, it needs to be covered. And so that weed's going to come there, that forb, and can grow there. And, most of these things we call weeds, we just haven't found the purpose for. But yet most of the time, I'm not too worried about it. And we really don't have any. I mean, because the range has gotten healthy enough, it doesn't do that. But on occasion it does. And, we know we need to work on it, but it's what we haven't found the purpose for. But cattle eat them, really most garden vegetables would be considered weeds if they were grown in the pasture. So, I mean, it's what we're using them for.
Right. Yep. The salad, you put the salad on your plate, that's just a, plate full of weeds.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So have you had to work to get your cattle to eat those things, or have you done anything special, or is it a function of density and they start to experiment on their own? How's that work?
For us, it's been just the density. I really see density as a tool that answers a lot of problems. And whether that's grazing undesirables or opening up ground, and clearing off some ground for letting something else come in, them rarer plants that we never get to see that are hidden or don't have a chance to express themselves because we've maintained that constant grazing, density has been a huge tool for us. And at times it's almost like I just can't even get them tight enough to get,
Right.
things happening the way I want to. And, whether that's like I said, an invasive species moving in, it usually tells me that the density wasn't high enough. And it seems backwards. And a lot of people panic when they see what happens because it's really no different than what happens in a season-long pasture. The only thing is it happens in 1 or 3 days. And so it's really eye-opening on how fast, because they can come in, take it, but then they're gone, and it has a whole year to recover, and them other plants get to grow. And I got a picture on my phone that I got big blue stem growing in a hardpan spot, and it's right next to it, but it's it's in a location where typically you'd say it shouldn't be there,
Right.
So
Yeah, and so I've heard people say that this part of the world where we're at here in western South Dakota is dominated by cool season grasses. I've heard people, I think, even say 80 to 90% of our grasses are cool season grasses. Have you guys seen that change over time because you've allowed for rest? And I've always thought that was more a function of when we get rain than anything.
It is a function when we get rain. Most of our growth in our country is, by end of June, end of June, we've had 80% of our growth because of our moisture. But we are seeing an increase in, I call it color, because warm season grasses, when they mature out, are reds and, different colors. And so I like to see color in my pasture, not just yellow, when that time of year. But yeah, we've seen a lot more, a huge increase in warm season grasses from this. I don't know if you want to call it design. I don't even like plan or a system. Somebody called it a grazing system one time, and Pat Guptill, a friend of mine, he says, that's kind of like a septic system. Everything's the same all the time, and it's carrying junk. But so we're always talking about the grazing plan is essential, but planned grazing will fail.
Right. Yep.
So we have to have some kind of system, if you want to call it that, but it's got to be adaptable.
Right.
And,
the great philosopher Mike Tyson said everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
So, and that's, the other one that we always talk about is planning is indispensable, but having a plan is useless.
Yeah.
Because especially if that plan does become your system,
right.
You've just got rid of one paradigm and grabbed another one.
Yeah.
And now you're stuck, and you're going to end up with similar results.
Yeah, and everything changes every day, and that's one thing about diversity. When we go into a pasture any time of the year, there's something very high quality to graze. There's something lower quality, medium quality, and that's because of different species when they mature. But every day is different. I tell my students at grazing school, if you get where you think you figured it out for weighing the grass and knowing how much they're going to take and how much they're going to leave, that's only going to work for 2 days, because the cattle are changing, the grass is changing, everything's changing, and it's either growing or maturing, or calves, hopefully your calves are growing and they're heavier,
Right.
So, we constantly need to be observing and watching what's going on out there,
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a ever moving target, and we gotta be willing to adapt to the changes and move in a way that's going to make them make the conditions most favorable to the animals.
Yeah, and to the animals and to the soil. I've learned, there was a point where I thought you could have one or the other, soil health or animal health, but now I'm to the point where I'm really learning how to balance both of them, and I think that's really, really important. And that's where we think that it was all created in chaos, is because it's changing all the time. But really, there is an order to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, I think that I've come to realize recently, even in my own theological studies, that God created Adam and He put him in the garden, but then Adam's mandate was to make the rest of the world look like the garden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was to take that garden pattern out into the world. And the garden pattern, it was ordered on some level, but it wasn't like rows.
Right.
Ordered
exactly.
like rows.
Yeah, right.
So I think we've got the same mandate, to be fruitful and multiply, to subdue the earth, to go out there and to manage it, make it better than we found it.
Yeah. And that's, like we talk about, you said something about weeds, and like what you're just saying there, everything complements each other. It's, even in this day and age, we don't want people to tell us what our worth is, and so we get our worth from Christ. Mm-hmm. Well, so the same thing as far as, like I was mentioned earlier, people don't see much use in a yucca plant in the pasture. But it's all part of our environment, our own ecosystem, which I think our ranches is an ecosystem, because we have everything on the brittleness scale from 1 to 10. We have riparian areas, we have hard pan spots, so we need to manage all them areas that way. But the yucca plant, we wouldn't have the yucca plant without the yucca moth to create the fruit. We wouldn't have the yucca moth without the yucca plant. They go together, and they had to be created together. And they're part of the ecosystem, as far as them plants all complement each other, of bringing up different minerals. And they're exudating, they're feeding other plants as they do this.
Right.
And like people get excited to see, dandelion's a weed, but we have several dandelions around. Well, in every sample I've ever had is we're low in calcium. Well, dandelions go down and they bring up calcium.
Right.
Well, that's helping the whole system work better.
Yep. Yeah. And you kind of talk about that yucca plant and the yucca moth, and it kind of makes me feel like, or it sounds like, a delicate system. Like it is fragile, but it's also very resilient. Now, how do those two things coexist? It's resilient in the fact that if you put a lot of management pressure on it, negative management pressure, season-long grazing at the same time every year in the same pasture, with the same density, it will close itself off, and it will protect itself, and you'll have just the same 3 or 4 or 5 species out there because you're putting pressure on it. Now, if you relieve that pressure and you let it come back, it will flourish, and there will be more species, more diversity out there. So it's delicate in that balance of diversity, but it's also resilient in that you can make it into just a few species out there.
Oh, very much.
Keep that pressure on it. So, I guess talk to me about some of that delicate balance and some of the other examples of the way things are all kind of put together to maintain health.
When you think of the delicate balance, my mind goes to really like the dung beetles and the depletion of them. At every level, we can think what we're doing a good job, and we see wildlife. Say we see a deer. Well, you can only run so many deer. So the smaller the animal insect gets, the more vital it is to the system, and the more that's telling you something. So we can have millions of dung beetles, And if we don't see any, we have a serious problem. You know, I always ask people, you know, what do you hear when you wake up in the morning? Do you hear birds singing? Do you hear, you know, is the system alive or is it dead? When you go out and you're looking for dung beetles, is the system living or is it dead? And I think of, you know, like the use of porons and stuff like that to control the flies that are a pest, but we're killing the dung beetles. And the flies, you know, they're the pests, so they're going to be the first ones that return from that. It's like we've bred a better fly over the last several years, 100 years, 50 years, but they also have a role in the system. You know, I'll go into this because I picked the 4 most annoying thing to ranchers, you know, and in my diversity talk, and one is flies, you know, and we just talked about them a little bit, but they have a major role in the system to clean up carrion and, you know, and lay their eggs and decompose carcasses and whatnot, and manure pats to an extent as well. But when we pour them for control of that, instead of using the system to control them, moving them, keeping the cattle healthier, because they respond to immune system responses. If the cattle are healthy, the flies really don't bug them, especially if they're hormonally balanced cattle, you know. And so we go to from flies, the beaver, and this was on the microbiome that day, but you know, most ranchers want beaver out of the system because they cut down all their trees, you know, or they ruin creek crossings or build a dam right by a creek crossing, which I would too. That's a handy spot to build a dam. But really, they're the ones that make the ecosystem possible to grow trees, because once they slow the water up, then that creates the habitat for them trees to grow and shrubs. There's a neighbor up north here that, and it was before my time, but everybody talked about he would never kill a beaver and wouldn't ruin their dams. That's on that creek. That is actually where the trees start. Is on everything above him, where everybody tried to trap out the beaver. They don't have no trees, and so, but it raises the water table. It holds that water from running off and lets the silt settle in them ponds and makes meadows. But yet we don't want to hold up all the water, so God made a muskrat, you know, and poke a hole in it, you know. So but it's a system working together. And I know a friend here, you know, and he's right on the river, and you know there is places for beaver, but they'd moved up his draws and his creeks, and he had one pasture that he really only get a few days of use out of every year because there was no water on it. Well, then last year of all years, which was a super dry year, he got to use it for like 3 weeks watering out of beaver dams. You know, so they really helped the system there, you know, and it all just plays together that if we want water and our water cycle to be working together and that ground to infiltrate, and so that's where species come in together too, where them roots are living or some are dead at different times, and we can infiltrate that water. And but we know we're not going to infiltrate it all. I mean, and that's where the beaver comes in to try to hold that up on the land. If we'd hold more land up, water upland, you know, the whole system is healthier below that. And so, like I said, then the muskrat come in, and you think of that balance then of mosquito. And it's not like a lot of ranchers spray for mosquitoes, but pesticide's a pesticide, you know, and I know cities that do it for mosquitoes, and we have mosquitoes out this morning. So, but you know, you think about what is their purpose? I really truly believe everything has a purpose, and I try to search that out. And you know, a mosquito is like, I mean, for a lot of years, it's like, I don't get this, God. Why would you create a mosquito? And there is some things that probably come in and why they suck blood and different things after the fall or whatever. I've heard different analogies, but really the mosquito, you know, they keep stale water clean. The larvae in the water is actually what keeps blue algae from blooming. and then having health problems in your cattle. As soon as the water starts flowing, they can't hatch no more. So as soon as the water goes stale, then they can hatch. Well, as soon as we trying to kill mosquitoes, which we look at as the pest, the biggest predator, I always like just asking this question. I wait for answers on it too, what the biggest predator of a mosquito is, but it's the dragonfly. And it takes 4 years for them to complete their life cycle. So once we break their life cycle because they don't have the food to eat, then, every problem that man tries to fix, we're trying to find a solution for. And I don't believe we can fix it. We need to let nature fix it because there's been an order and a system set up to,
Yep. Yeah, and that goes back to, I think, an issue of humility, honestly, assuming I don't know what's going on here. So, for example, I think 3 weeks, maybe, after we started grazing yearlings, I think we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30,000 pounds of stock density per acre. This was 2 years ago when we brought in somebody else's yearlings and were grazing through our place. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks and we'd found dung beetles in the manure pats, and they were cattle that hadn't been poured in the last 3 months,
Yep.
And I always wonder, are those dung beetles always there? This is the easy explanation. Dung beetles are always there, but the manure that's been poured doesn't taste good to them. Now, the difficult explanation is that manure that's been poured kills dung beetles. And so if that's true, so everybody I know smarter than me tells me it is true that manure that's been poured kills dung beetles. How the heck did they know to come to that little 320 acres in the middle of the prairie and find manure that is fresh? What kind of communication network did they have to say, hey, there's manure right here in this middle of, in the middle of this prairie where we can come and thrive.
It's not by chance, is it?
Right.
It's not by chance, But
again, it's a humility issue. It's like there's more going on here. There's some, because I think I've heard somebody say what number of miles a dung beetle can fly to find new.
Yeah, I don't even remember what that is. It's a long ways. Yeah, but I know density. There comes density again. Is part of that. They're attracted to that smell.
Sure.
And I don't know whether pour-on or whatever gives another smell but
right.
Yeah.
But there's more manure here per acre. So let's go.
Yep. Yeah.
So
no, I think I get excited about that stuff because it's mind blowing. And like you said, it's humility. It's like, what am I in this?
Yeah. Yep. And just the humility to take your foot off the brake. Cause I really do think that, like you said, chaos, it's scary sometimes. It's scary to drive fast on a gravel road. Sometimes you get a little bit beyond your ability to drive and you feel like you're out of control. It can be scary to just let the nature do its thing. Let God's design play out as he designed it. It can be scary because we don't know, so I look at those pesticides, I look at, herbicides, I look at those as brake pedal. For the ecological system. We're slowing things down. I can understand this. I 3 or 4 species. I know what all of them are. None of them scare me. None of them are going to kill my cattle.
Yep. Yeah.
But then, like you said, you don't have winter fat, so you got to feed. You got to supplement or replace.
Right.
Substitute feeding.
To make it all goes together.
Yeah.
Like you said, when you were talking about the brakes, you know why they invented brakes, right?
Why?
So we could go fast. People think it's so we could stop, but it's so we could go faster.
Sure. Yeah.
Really.
You can slow down in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
If you have brakes.
Yep.
If you ever been in a vehicle that ran out of brakes, you know how long it takes to stop some of those. And the bigger and the heavier they are, the longer it takes to stop them.
And that's when a guy lets nature, work with it and let it kind of do its thing. As I mentioned, the problems are going to come first. I mean, that's just kind of the way it's designed because them are the ones we've either have more resilience to the grazing pressure or to the pesticide problem. Them are always the biggest ones, and there's something nobody really talks about, but the dung fly, And we see them around. You don't see them around like you used to. We're all looking for dung beetles now, which is kind of neat and exciting. But there's the yellow dung fly same thing. It's
No, I don't know anything about the dung fly. This is new information for me.
So I mean, they're around there too, but pesticide still has the same problem, and them are the species that seem to take it the hardest, is the beneficial ones, so, or the ones we look at as beneficial.
Yeah. Well, like you said about the mosquito, what's the number one predator of mosquito? The dragonfly.
Yeah.
Where do you see, how often do you see dragonflies anymore?
Yeah. And not near as much as I did when I was a kid.
Right.
I mean, we used to catch them all the time, and they're big and, and flying all over, and we just don't have them.
So I think there's two virtues. There's humility, thinking, I don't understand this system. I can't understand it all, but I'm going to trust that if I take my foot off the brake pedal and let it do its thing, it's going to be better than if I don't. Mm-hmm. And then I think there's another virtue is patience.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Very much so.
Letting that unhealthy land go through its process of healing. You mentioned dandelions are pulling up calcium to the surface. That's helping because your soil is low in calcium, so dandelions are doing their thing. So talk to me about the patience involved in these things and how some of that works together.
Well, and that's the patience.
I'm in a season of learning how impatient I am in other areas of my life, and learning how important patience is for managing people well. And so we can commiserate here about lack of patience.
Yeah, very much so. That's if you ask for patience, guess what?
Yeah, my father-in-law says I prayed for patience and I got 3 women in 1 bathroom.
There's only one way to learn patience, and it's to go through it. That's where, like you say, take your foot off the brake, but you don't necessarily put it on the gas.
Yeah,
let it work and be patient. And one of the other great tools versus density is observation. And sometimes it's some people think you're not doing anything all day, but kind of funny story now. You're going to tell it on the podcast, or I will. But I was out with the cows one time, and they were doing everything seemed fine, but I was by the water tank, and I mean there was a ammonia smell, and man, it's just like something's wrong. Cows are on too much protein, or not, I don't have my density right or something, or something's going on. And I called. I don't remember who I called. Anyway, they're like, well, I have no idea. And that's how I'm always looking for outside advice. And they're like, call Josh Leifers. So I called Josh, and he's like, well, what are you doing? And so I'm telling him what's going on. Well, I'm on my cell phone to my ear, crawling around on my hands and knees in the pasture talking to Josh and smelling cow pats, and it's like, this is, at a point you just get plumb weird and nerded out. But I'm like, no, this smells fine, and go back to the water tank. Well, it turned out we had a pretty good rain deal, and it was kind of muddy around the tank, and they had actually folded the growth that was there underneath, and it was I don't even remember the term now, but it was putting off ammonia from around the tank, decomposing. It was so crisis averted, but that's all part of the observing cows, not just swinging through and putting out salt and mineral and moving them and going on. It's paying attention to their fill, paying attention to how happy they are, what they're acting like, what the grass looks like, like I said, the smaller the animal, the more important it is. What's the insect and bug activity like, Like the other day we was out with the cows, and I said something about having flies, and Steve Campbell was here, and he's like, well, they got a few flies on them, but nothing that's a problem. So, don't worry about it, So that's just all kind of part of it. And having that community around you to be able to do that, to have people come say, oh, no, it's okay, I
would say talk me off the ledge.
Yeah, right, yeah. Because, There was a point there, like you talk about patience, and I just warn people in this. There's like in ranching for profit, they talk about that 3-year slump, and then it seems like.
Is that what's going on?
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
I think so. That's where I've been there. So it's like just about the time you're ready to give up is about ready when you're going to pop a bubble, and just really things take off, and we can speed that up. Had a friend that he just jumped right into daily moves, and that first year probably really put everything into a shock because the cows weren't used to it. The grass wasn't used to it. And you think, well, it's just grass, but it was grass that was, all of a sudden now in August, the ridge tops were being grazed when it wouldn't, would have been grazed maybe early in the spring, and then now they're in the draws. And, so it took the whole system a couple years to respond to that, and to get the organic matter and humus built up on top of the hills and different things. And it's a real deal. I mean, I don't want to scare people. I think it's a road that's, I would never turn back from, but there is some challenges in it. It's like Pat always said, you kind of trade one set of problems for another,
right?
But this is a lot more fun to me. But and like I said, working with God's creation, it's mind blowing. It really is. I mean, everything that's going on there is just wow.
Yeah. People probably get sick of hearing me say it, but the land that I bought had been a hayfield probably since they brought home the first 9 mower, or maybe even the single. I don't know.
Maybe the 5-foot mower.
Yeah. And knowing what I know now, I probably should have started on the backside of my place that's been hayed less frequently and has more cool season natives in it. But I was on the front side, which is all crested wheat pretty much, and some accidental alfalfa every once in a while you'll find. But I started there, and I swear that stuff did not regrow after the first graze.
No.
It just, I think, like you said, it shocked it. It's like, this is the first time I've ever been bitten off in the growing season ever.
Right.
That when was all the crested wheat planted in this country, in the 30s, 40s?
Yeah, 30s and 40s. I got some pictures downstairs of him. It's a Perkins County book, and it's pictures of them improving the rangeland and planting crested wheatgrass. And I was like, I wonder if them guys ever regretted that.
Yeah. Well, it just, like I said, I could. It's feasible. It's conceivable that, I suppose, maybe in a drought year it might have gotten grazed in the growing season, but it's conceivable to me that those yearlings biting those crested wheat plants at the end of May might have been the first time they'd been grazed in the growing season in their life,
right?
Since the 30s or 40s, and so it was. I think it was a shock to that system because it really didn't do anything after that, and then next year or last year was the second year, and we didn't touch it at all.
Okay.
And it barely got ankle high.
Oh wow.
And then I think the grasshoppers came in later in the summer and stripped what was there off. So it was.
Well, and you also have, since it was hay ground for so long, you probably have a severe mineral depletion,
right?
Where it was mined off basically.
Yep. Export nutrients.
Yep.
I mean, you're just always hauling it off and never putting it back. So that's where, when we bale graze, that's where we bale graze, is on that land.
Yeah.
So,
and they said, and I've heard guys talk about starting where there's life, and building them spots bigger.
Well, and that's the thing. Ian Mitchell Innes told me that, and then just a couple weeks ago, Jim Elizondo said the same thing. Graze the best half first. Go to the best half of your ranch, spend your whole growing season there with all the cows that your whole ranch can support. That increases your density. It gives the not good half, the worst half, a chance to recover. And then Jim Elizondo added a new wrinkle to that for me. He said, graze half of your ranch every year during the growing season, and then alternate years.
And that's basically what our system is because we graze roughly half of it through a summer, and then the other half of it in the winter. By the time we come back around, it's opposite. It's just kind of the way it works. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I think those are just really helpful ways of thinking, and they're very adaptable. It's not a recipe. I've been trying to resist the temptation to ask you about density, because if we talk about an actual number of density that you guys are running at, then the guy in Idaho is going to say, well, that'll never work here, and the guy in Missouri is going to say, really, that's what my neighbors who season long graze, that's what they do all the time.
Yeah, or somebody right here will say, oh, there's the magic number.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
yep, that's what I need to do.
And ours varies all the time. I mean, so seasonality, our highest densities are usually in the fall and winter. Just I get kind of the way it works out, because like when I'm calving, we're at a lower density because we're calving and we want them spread out a little bit more, and we move the drop bunch ahead of the pairs.
Kind of sandhills calving.
Yeah, and we did that when the kids were little, because they hated moving sorting pairs.
Don't blame them.
Yeah, who don't? What kid don't? And somebody's on a Shetland pony and trying to move a pair, and the cow won't take it, and so they could do that on their own. They're 8, 9 years old, and they could go sort pairs because they just left the pairs back, and they could pick up the heavies and move them, and they couldn't hardly do it wrong.
Right.
So it worked really well for us to do it that way, and then we just start catching them up, like in the Sandhills deal. And then our density increases as we go, and basically throughout the year. And then, there's been times where densities were severely high. I mean, really high, because we want to get something done, or we want to graze a certain way, or we're trying to get a certain percentage off. And, the longer they're there, the harder that is, Most people eventually get it all, but their performance goes down, So we want to take a certain amount, but we want to take it as fast as we can,
right?
Yep. And so
that was, I think a lot of people were shocked to hear Jim Elizondo say 80 to 90% removed, but the critical piece of that is if you can do it in one day or less.
Yes. That is very much so. And you think about, they're like, 80%, well, you're not leaving enough for soil health. Well, actually, when you're doing that in a day or less, you're very much adding soil health and adding life. Because, like a cow has 5 mouths. She's eating with one and she's trampling with 4, and so all that's energy into the system.
Right. Yep. And manure and urine and all that is very concentrated in those things. Not to mention the fact that you're only there for one day, and you're away for, in our context, you're away for 365 to 540.
Right.
Something like that. You probably aren't coming back if you take 80% or 90% in one day. You're not coming back for a year, probably.
Oh, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So I think that kind of back to this conversation of diversity and allowing diversity to do its thing, I think that pests are only a pest in an unbalanced system.
Very much so. Who said it? They said it on here, I think. Was they can fence out grasshoppers.
Yeah. Steve Kenyon.
Steve did. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's people ask me about grasshoppers at our place. I'm like, there's some there, but they're not a plague, you know?
Yeah.
And even last year we did have them, but I think that's because the plants were stressed. They were stressed last year early.
Yeah.
And I think the more stressed the plant gets, the more attractive it is to a grasshopper.
Right.
And I think that's pretty much all pests that we're trying to manage they are attracted to a weakened or a stressed animal or plant.
Well, they are a symptom.
Right.
And really we need to, for the whole diversity, the whole system working together, we need to look for the cause, beyond that, not just treat the symptoms all the time. And that's kind of where our industry has gotten. That's where all our ads take us, is treat the symptoms instead of looking for the root.
Yeah. If they aren't promising increased whatever yield, weaning weight, those things, they're saying, well, this is how you, or they're saying you can increase yield and weaning weight by
right.
With this.
Our
it's either something
so
that you're
big now.
It's either an additive to increase it, or it's a Band-Aid or a medication to increase it. Either you're feeding them something new and different, or you're putting on a new and different chemical that's going to...
And them deals, they have a lifetime.
Right.
Anytime you have an input, you have a huge increase. initially.
Yep.
But it has a depletion return. And so if we can work with what nature, what God has designed, and work with that, that's actually the opposite. It builds on itself.
Right.
The more life we start putting in the system, the more life it has, the more production it produces. It's compounding.
Right.
And that's what's so amazing to me.
Yep. Yeah, and that's Steve Kenyon, another one. He talks about his fly control. He'll walk out and take a video of his mob out there grazing, and he says the fly control, here it is, and it's just birds. The sky's almost black with birds flying around his cattle because they're there feasting on the flies and everything else.
Yep.
So, I just really, like I said, I really enjoy this conversation. It's one of my favorites. Any other major things? I mean, you mentioned the 4 pests: the beaver, the muskrat, the mosquito, and the fly, right?
Yeah.
And they've all, the beaver slows down our water. The muskrat pokes a hole in the dam that the beaver built. The flies there processing manure, right?
And carrion,
yeah, right. Breaking down things, and the mosquitoes there to keep that water fresh with the larvae they lay. Anything else? Any other major pieces?
There's a bunch of major pieces. No, I don't have anything right offhand, but they're all a major piece.
Yeah.
And that's, I think we really need to look at them all as a major piece, whether it's earthworms or microbes and just everything we can't see. They all have a part in it,
Yep. The unintended consequence, I think that's the bottom line, is everything that we try to fix, you might get that fixed, but there's going to be an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
And it kind of go back to that humility and patience thing.
Yeah. I mean, look at, you think of drought in the 30s, and they planted sweet clover all over, well, then what's the unintended consequence of that? The gumbo gets covered in sweet clover, because they're trying to get something to grow, which is great. But, I know it has its drawbacks,
Yep.
Cheatgrass, the way I understand it, was come from packaging. Like when homesteaders would order China, it would become packed in cheatgrass seed. Well, then the homesteaders just throw it out their door, and look what we have now.
Yeah. It's another way to locate a homestead on your place, the patch of cheatgrass.
Yeah, well, it's all over. So yeah,
right.
But it's but why is that annual there? I mean, it's not a problem. You could spray it out, but it's a symptom trying to tell you something.
Right.
So everything we do have a consequence. It's cause and effect. Our management today affects tomorrow, and we've really just got to learn to observe and work in our system, in our ecosystem.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's an important piece. Just let's wrap up, talk a little bit about succession, and I mean plant succession, those kinds of things. How have you seen that play out on your place? The process of seeing new species that you haven't seen, winter fat, you mentioned big blue stem. How have you seen that process play out here?
It's still in play,
right.
Last year, huge drought year, and of course where it was getting rested, I was going through there and big patches of switchgrass, which are, I mean, you just don't see that anymore. You see it in road ditches and stuff, some, but it's, where it's over rested, but it takes that recovery and the process. We keep finding more and more species, they just keep coming. And, we had a friends and board tour here of the South Dakota Grassland Coalition. And we went to the top of the butte, just look around and so we made a line from where we parked the pickup to the top of the butte, which is a pretty good transition of different landscape,
Sure.
And we quit counting at 109 species of forage, and some of them we had to look up and nobody knew what they were, so it's,
you get the Grassland Coalition stumped. You're doing some work.
The NRCS and extension guys were here, and everybody was stumped, and everybody's on their phone trying to find what it is. And, that's just pretty neat to me. And we talk about, you said something about cool season, and I haven't heard here particularly, other than I had heard here that when the homesteaders first come that most every draw had trees in it. Well, now we don't have that. So why is that? We was up to Jordan, Montana, and it's really sagebrush country. And they said when they first come into that country, they called it the Sea of Grass. And now it's not. Why is that? So we really need to be looking at our system, and then I think of honoring where it come from and where, what God put in place and created that really plays together.
I should go and look, because I've quoted it enough times that I should know where exactly they were, but the Lewis and Clark expedition talks about being able to tie the grass in knots over your saddle horn. That's how tall it was back when they were coming through, and, in their day. And I think that's, just totally mind-blowing to us, where we think of ourselves as short grass prairie.
Right.
Well, I don't know where it was, but there's places where it wasn't so short at one point when according to the theories anyways, when the buffalo were here and in a high stock density and moving on because of the fouling effect and all those things that we're trying to imitate with our management,
Yeah, and some of that, obviously, I wasn't there, so I don't know.
Right.
But, I've had here, I don't know what you'd call this, but as far as the plains, but, out in the middle of the pasture and have 6 foot big blue stem growing.
Right.
Not East River, not not in a high moisture deal, but just, so I think them grasses in their prime are really high in bricks and really desirable, so they get grazed out pretty fast,
Right.
And then they just quit coming
because
they keep getting grazed down. And so if they get that time for recovery, and rest and recovery are two different things,
Right.
I've probably heard that enough on here, but that actually getting it to recover and to grow is really important to the whole system. And I think, like what Jim just mentioned a couple weeks ago, that, the more I get into it, the more I'm into that mode too, because like I said, if you graze at the same time, same place, same way every year, it's going to stay the same. And if we can, I don't want to say bear it up, but because we leave armor on the ground, it's got to be protected. You got to have armor on it. And, but it's opened up. I didn't realize it till after we had it, but winter fat needs sunlight to germinate. Well, if that ground was always covered by 8 inches of grass, it was never going to germinate, and just so happened that it happened on accident, but it was a deal where I was at grazing school and Kyler, he was the only one home. He was supposed to move cows on Wednesday or whatever, and I told him they'd be fine till then. Well, and what Wednesday night is he's had football practice, and then right after football he had youth group, and didn't get home till 9:30 at night. And so he didn't, and then the next morning he's off to school again, and I got home Thursday afternoon, and well, it was a breakthrough for us, because we didn't hurt things that much. There was still a ton of armor, literally, all laying on the ground, and that's where the winter fat first come. And now we're seeing it, and I think there's like 11 different spots, 11 different pastures that it's growing in now, or paddocks, whatever you want to call them. But so I mean, it's spreading, and a lot of the experts said it would disappear, but because of that recovery, it's propagating.
Yeah, very good. Very good, Bart. Of course, like you said, there's lots of major pieces, and we could go on for a long time, but I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Clay. Thank you for coming out, and I really enjoy this and enjoy the podcast. So,
very good stuff there. Really appreciate Bart and his willingness to allow me to come up and hang out and look at his cows with him and his grass and other things too. Winter fat, we saw some of that out there, and he showed me what it looks like and what to look for and where it likes to grow and some of those things. So very much looking forward to episode 250 coming your way. It's probably going to be closer to the middle of next week, but be sure to be on the lookout for that. It's going to be a pretty unique episode, and I'm really looking forward to the way it's all coming together. So Looking forward to episode 250 coming your way real soon for another episode of the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.